There is a quiet kind of exile that doesn't require leaving home. No airports, no suitcases, just an invisible line drawn in the halls of power, and two names that fall silently to the other side of it. Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie. They live in Britain. They attend the occasional royal event. They smile when photographed. Yet, in the machinery of monarchy, they no longer belong. Before we dive in, there's something I need to share with you. Over the past few days, thousands have watched these stories unfold, but most haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, I invite you now to join us. Subscribe to Crownverse so you never miss the next chapter in this unfolding royal history. The story begins not with the sisters themselves, but with the institution that once defined them, and the scandal that forced that institution to choose between loyalty and survival. In 2019, the monarchy entered a crisis that would permanently alter its internal map of belonging. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II, faced scrutiny over his association with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender whose name would stain more than reputations. Andrew's disastrous interview with the BBC's Newsnight that November marked the point of no return. His attempt to defend himself only deepened public outrage. Within days, the palace released a statement. The Duke of York would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. It was the beginning of his exile and, quietly, the beginning of his daughter's. Because in a hereditary system built on image, guilt does not stay contained. It spreads by proximity, by name, by blood, by address. At first, the sisters remained silent. Beatrice, then engaged to property developer Edoardo Mapelli-Mozzi, and Eugenie, recently married to Jack Brooksbank, carried on their private lives. Neither held official roles within the firm, neither drew from the sovereign grant, but both still carried titles, and the public still attached them to the name York. In an institution that defines itself by lineage, the paradox was unavoidable. They were royal enough to be judged, but not royal enough to be protected. Royal Lodge, the 30-room residence in Windsor Great Park, became the symbolic epicenter of this slow unraveling. It is the home of their father, secured in 2003 through a 75-year lease, reportedly at a peppercorn rent. It is also where Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife, has lived for years, long after their divorce. After the Epstein scandal, the property became more than an address. It became a question of legitimacy. Reports in the Times and the Daily Telegraph detailed tensions between King Charles III and Andrew, with sources saying the king had urged his brother to downsize, to move into Frogmore Cottage, the former home of Harry and Meghan. Andrew reportedly refused. This resistance was legal, but not moral. It exposed a deeper divide, the monarchy's modern need to appear accountable versus the Yorks' inherited sense of permanence. For Beatrice and Eugenie, Royal Lodge is both childhood memory and political liability. Every photograph taken there, a family gathering, a private visit, risks becoming a headline. The house that once symbolized home now represents the very system their generation has been distanced from. When Andrew Lowney said that Andrew might eventually be encouraged to leave the UK, perhaps to Abu Dhabi or Switzerland, it was less about geography and more about visibility. The family's presence had become an institutional burden. And the York sisters understood. When power begins to isolate its outliers, exile doesn't need borders. It begins with silence. The royal family today is smaller by design. King Charles has championed a slimmed-down monarchy, one that emphasizes efficiency, transparency, and a tighter circle of active members. The model works for modern optics, but it leaves collateral damage, blood relatives rendered unnecessary. Beatrice and Eugenie are part of that collateral damage. Despite their titles, neither performs official royal duties, neither receives taxpayer funding. Their appearances are social, not constitutional. Weddings, funerals, charity galas. The palace rarely lists them in official announcements. In contrast, the working royals, Charles, Camilla, William, Kate, Anne, Edward, Sophie, operate as the public face of the crown. The Yorks do not. According to The Guardian and BBC News, this was an intentional restructuring. The monarchy cannot carry the weight of both scandal and redundancy. In a immediate age defined by optics, peripheral royals become risk factors, not assets. For Beatrice and Eugenie, this means existing in a gray zone, technically royal, functionally irrelevant. They live within walking distance of Windsor Castle, yet are no longer part of its inner narrative. Their names appear in the court circular only sporadically. Their family photos are private. Their children, while royal by blood, hold no titles. In the architecture of monarchy, they have become ornamental, reminders of an older order the institution would rather phase out quietly than confront publicly. The paradox of the York sisters' exile is that it is conducted in plain sight. They are not fugitives, they are fixtures, present at weddings, at funerals, at jubilees. But their presence is always peripheral, their roles undefined. To the public, they remain Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Yet behind the titles, they live as private professionals. Beatrice has built a career in finance and technology, once a vice president at Affinity, now known for her work in business and digital innovation. Eugenie works in art, serving as a director at Hauser and Wirth and founding a charitable initiative focused on modern slavery awareness. They speak in interviews about empathy, about balance, about privacy. It is the language of people who know what they cannot control, the narrative. But even as they redefine themselves professionally, their surname keeps dragging them back. Beatrice Mapelli-Mozzi, Eugenie Brooksbank, the media rarely use those names. To headlines, they remain the daughters of Prince Andrew. This is the quiet cruelty of royal exile. You can step out of the palace, but you cannot step out of the story. To understand why Beatrice and Eugenie's exile matters, one must understand how scandal functions inside monarchy.
Unlike politics, monarchy cannot dismiss its own members. There is no election, no expulsion. Instead, the system relies on what one palace aide once called managed visibility. Those who are useful are showcased. Those who are not are simply unseen. After Andrew's settlement in this civil case with Virginia Giuffre, a payment reportedly in the range of £12 million without admission of guilt, the palace strategy became clear. Silence him, shrink him, starve the scandal of attention. That containment extended by association. The fewer public links to the York name, the safer the brand of monarchy. When Beatrice and Eugenie attended the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee, their inclusion was interpreted less as family unity and more as careful optics. Daughters supporting their grandmother, not representing the institution. After the Queen's passing, they stood among the mourners at Westminster Abbey. But when the working royals emerged onto the palace balcony, they were not there. It was the visual confirmation of their quiet exclusion. The monarchy's message was unmistakable. Lineage does not guarantee inclusion. Why does this matter? Because the crown's power depends on control, not just of image, but of inheritance. Every royal generation is a calculation. Who strengthens the institution and who threatens it? For King Charles, the math is clear. The monarchy cannot afford to carry the York's shadow into the next reign. The strategy is structural, not personal. By removing the Duke of York's titles, by limiting Sarah Ferguson's public role, by narrowing the circle of active royals, the palace has effectively cordoned off an entire branch of the family tree. It is a form of administrative exile, the royal equivalent of deletion without denunciation. Andrew's daughters remain symbols of continuity, yet stripped of institutional power. Their public invisibility is not punishment, but policy. This is how modern monarchy survives. It does not destroy, it diminishes. Proximity has always defined privilege within the royal system. Proximity to the monarch, to visibility, to influence. For Beatrice and Eugenie, proximity has become paradox. They live close to the core of royal geography, Windsor, Kensington, St. James's, yet their institutional proximity is almost nil. They are invited to family events, but not to strategy meetings. Their photographs appear on charity pages, but not in palace press releases. When Sarah Ferguson attended the Duchess of Kent's funeral in September 2025, standing among senior royals, the cameras lingered briefly on her, but not long enough to grant restoration. In the same frame, the sisters' absence spoke louder than presence could. It is in these moments, who stands where, who speaks to whom, who remains silent, that the monarchy draws its internal map. And in that map, the York sisters are no longer at the center. Yet exile is not necessarily annihilation. In the monarchy's carefully managed image, distance can become a tool, a chance for reinvention beyond the institution's constraints. Beatrice and Eugenie have quietly built new networks of influence. Both maintain relationships with influential figures in art, business, and philanthropy. They have found relevance in individual capacity, something their predecessors rarely managed. Unlike their father, they show discipline in discretion. Unlike their mother, they avoid spectacle. This is not rebellion, it is evolution. The royal system that once defined them now watches them adapt, surviving not through defiance, but through restraint. And yet the paradox remains. The monarchy can neither fully include nor fully erase them. They are the living evidence of the institution's moral contradiction, that bloodline confers both privilege and peril. When Princess Eugenie named her first son August, she chose not to give him a royal title. The decision was quiet but telling. It was the continuation of a retreat, an understanding that proximity to power now comes at a cost. Beatrice followed a similar path with her daughter Sienna. Both sisters are shaping a legacy defined not by crowns, but by normalcy. Still, the monarchy cannot unwrite their lineage. They will always be granddaughters of a queen, nieces to a king, cousins to a future monarch, but they are not heirs. And that space between blood and authority is where their story unfolds. Exile without departure, relevance without role, loyalty without invitation. In the end, the York sisters' story is not a scandal in itself, it is a study of how scandal reshapes structure. The monarchy's survival has always depended on selective inclusion. When faced with a crisis, it trims, isolates, and absorbs. The Yorks are the latest casualties of that process. The question is not whether Beatrice and Eugenie deserve their distance. It is what that distance reveals about the institution's fragility, its dependence on appearance, and its quiet cruelty toward those born too close to controversy. Royal exile in this century is not a ship leaving for the colonies. It is a slow fade from the frame, a smile on the balcony that is no longer televised, a name omitted from the next generation's portrait. They remain in Windsor, in photographs, in public memory, but outside the circle of power. Exiled, not by choice and not by law, exiled by bloodline. And perhaps that is the truest test of monarchy in the modern world. Not how it crowns its heirs, but how it disposes of its own.